Pete Buttigieg is running for president. Now, that's not a huge prognostication. He ran for president in 2020. He was running as the mayor of the fourth largest city in Indiana with a pretty mediocre track record. What made Pete Buttigieg special was that he checked the box. He was going to be able to let the Democrats say, this is America's first blank president. See, they love that. They love it when they get to say that they've nominated the first blank anything. Now, the blank that Pete Buttigieg fills is that he's a gay man. And he's not just any kind of gay man. He's a gay man that reminds all white, liberal, suburban women of their favorite gay best friend. And so he's harmless. And he's just a good guy. And he's got a military record. And he talks like Kermit the Frog. Although his appearance on a podcast recently, he's gone through a bit of a metamorphosis. First of all, the podcast is called Flagrant, and it's one of those bro podcasts. See, all the bros hanging out and talking, and there's Pete right in the middle there. He's a bro, don't you know? And if you listen to him talk, as you will in just a moment, you're going to hear that he's modified his voice a little bit. It's a little less Kermit the Froggy. It's a little deeper. It's a little more measured. It's a little more bro-like. He's also grown a beard, which makes him a bro. We mentioned yesterday with Elizabeth Warren that Democrats think that the lesson to the 2024 election is to go on podcasts, which is not the lesson. The lesson is to be authentic and not be afraid to have a very real conversation about real things. Well, that happens often on long-form podcasts like Flagrant. So Buttigieg shows up, and then he tells a story about being a dad. And I don't know if you remember, but he and his husband, Chasten Buttigieg. By the way, Chasten, come on, seriously? You had to take his name as your name? What's going on there? Chasten, stand up to the patriarchy, dude. Be your own man. You don't have to be under his thumb, so to speak. Anyway, he and his husband, Chasten Buttigieg, famously adopted 2 babies, and then he had to take paternity leave when disasters were happening in the transportation infrastructure in America. But, he's the Secretary of Transportation, and he's due his paternity leave after all. So he talked about that experience, but spoiler alert, he couldn't talk about adopting his babies without raising the systemic racism in the United States of America. How do those two things connect? Oh, take it away, Pete.
Oh, have you thought about when your son gets older, his experience in the world probably different from yours? How would you have those combos with him? Or even, let's say, your daughter, learning to deal with her hair. It's going to be a little difficult. How have you thought about these things? Do they concern you?
Yeah, we think about it all the time. And it's not like we have it all figured out. So we were in...
but if anybody knows how important identity is,
of course. So we were in what's called a surprise adoption scenario. So we literally, I was at work, I was traveling, we got a phone call, Chasten called me, and the next day we were in a rural Midwestern hospital holding him in our arms, and they were 1 day old. It was like that, from normal life to and by the way, it's twins, which was amazing.
You didn't know it was twins.
We were just on a list. We said that we were willing to adopt, or we wanted to adopt. We said that we wanted to adopt without regard for race. By the way,
did you notice that he slipped there? He slips a few times in this conversation, and that's part of the problem when you go on these podcasts, because you get sort of relaxed and you say things in ways that, you're not thinking about your talking points. Did you hear that he said he's willing to adopt without regard to race? And then he stopped himself. And then he said he wanted to adopt without regard to race. Also, you noticed there when he said, the question had to do with identity and having to do with the racial disparity, because his children, his adopted children, are of mixed race. They're half Black. And the question was, do you think about this? And he said, oh, I think about it all the time. You think about it all the time? You look at your children and you think about them in terms of what racial category they're in all the time? I'm sorry. I'm going to make a moral judgment here. That's gross. And by the way, I have 4 children, and guess what? My 4 children are mixed race. And I do not think about it all the time. They're my children. I don't think about my children in terms of what racial category they're in. But Pete Buttigieg says that he thinks about it all the time. And I just question whether that's a wise thing for a parent to do and how a parent should look at their children. But, who am I to judge, I guess? Oh, well, actually, it's kind of my job to judge. But let's hear the story now. He's going to lay it out about how he was wanted to adopt babies regardless of race.
Or we wanted to adopt. We said that we wanted to adopt without regard for race. By the way, anybody who says race is not a thing in this country should experience an adoption process where there are literally different lists. If you say that you want a white kid only versus if you say that doesn't matter.
Wow.
Like literally a different list.
What is that? What do you mean by that?
The list for a white kid only is longer. And not only that, there was actually a discount, or you didn't have to pay a deposit on the fee.
Discount.
Yeah, he corrected himself again. Discount? Yeah, we got a bargain on this black baby. We didn't have to pay more. You had to pay more if you did that. Oh, what I mean is you didn't have to put a deposit down. By the way, he is in a white couple, right? If his husband, Chasten, were black, I bet the conversation would have been much different. For instance, is there a black-only list, right? You've got a list of parents who only want a white baby, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then you've got a list of parents who don't care one way or the other. Is there a list for parents who are black who only want to adopt black babies? I bet there is. Why don't we talk about that? Why isn't that something? Why he didn't experience it because he nor his partner is black. What about a list of Asian couples who are adopting and only want to adopt an Asian child, right? You see what I'm saying? But he is suggesting here that as a white couple, they were given the offer of adopting a white-only baby versus a mixed-race baby, or regardless of race, and in some way that suggests systemic racism. But I say to look at that and suggest systemic racism, you have to already be looking at the world through the prism of race. One other thing here, because I welcome this conversation about adoption in America. I think that it's a scandal in this country that we don't make adoption easier, that we don't facilitate adoption, that we don't encourage adoption. I think one of the reasons that we have such a high abortion rate in this country is because abortion has replaced adoption as a viable option. It appears that the only couples that we hear about adopting babies these days are couples like Pete and Chasten, who, believe it or not, scientifically, biologically, cannot procreate. I know you didn't learn that in a public school. But I'm telling you right now, no matter how hard they try, they can't. Now, if you want to talk about the roadblocks that couples have in this country in adopting a baby, that's a very important subject to have. And let me tell you something, there are racial concerns here. For instance, if you're a foster family and you are white, they will be very reluctant to put a black child in your home, because the social services infrastructure in this country believe that it is wrong to put a black child with a white family. That's a fact. They are reluctant to let a white couple adopt a black child because they want a black child to be raised by black parents. In fact, it is so difficult in this country, in many respects, to adopt children. Most of the adoptions in this country of a heterosexual couple end up being adoptions overseas with a foreign baby, often from Asia or from Latin America. Why is that, you may wonder? Why is it we see all of these Caucasian families raising Asian babies who were born in Korea or in China? Why is that? How can that be easier? It is. Because in this country, social workers have blocked multiple adoptions because of racial concerns. That is a fact. Pete Buttigieg is very close to actually prying into a scandal in the United States of America, but he's got it all ass backwards. All right, so let's keep watching about his discounted baby he got.
So this is like how it works.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. So we didn't know anything about the racial identity of the kids until they started to look mixed race, which they are. And like contending with like the hair thing is already like a thing, and like lots of advice, especially from like Black parents who like see stuff on Instagram, or they're like, let me tell you how to do it. Like a lot of advice. And like to begin with, like the idea of being a girl dad and dealing with girl hair was pretty intimidating. Like my hair is like very simple and straightforward. Obviously, like I'm a low maintenance kind of guy. And like starting to learn about like all the different products that are involved. Him too. Like we have like a whole sequence with you know, a conditioner and then essential oils, all this stuff. And you're always asking yourself, like, how can I be, you're already constantly asking yourself, how can I be a good dad? And now it's like, how can I be a good dad for kids who have a different racial identity than I do? And how can I help them navigate that? And what are the circumstances where there's nothing I can do to help them navigate that? And I need to connect them up to mentors and people in their lives, because the reality is like, this is not a colorblind society, and like their lives will be affected in some way by their racial, all of ours are, but one thing about being white is you don't have to think about the fact that when you're white, your racial identity is not something that you're reminded of all the time, in a way that they will be.
They will be reminded of their racial identity because of woke, virtue signaling liberals like Pete Buttigieg. Let's pray for these babies, honestly. I watch this as a father, and I think to myself, Pete, just love your kids. Just love on your kids and raise them right. And that other stuff will not matter. But sadly, in that family, apparently, it's going to be one of the only things that matters. But we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, after all, this is Pete Buttigieg, and he just can't help himself but looking at this world through a racial viewpoint. And I have a suspicion why. I'll tell you in a minute.
Getting big money out of politics. And in order to do that, we're going to have to reform the entire system. I am not a fan of, let's be clear, I'm not a fan of the current campaign finance system. And the reality is it's not going to get better in all of the ways we need it to get better without a constitutional reform. So there are things we can and should do right away. They can deal with black money, dark money.
He's speaking to the Breakfast Club live audience there. That's Charlemagne the God. And he's talking about dark money in politics, but he slips and calls it black money. We got to get black money out of politics. I think he meant dark money. Why does he constantly do this? Why, when Secretary of Transportation, did he spend all his time talking about systemic racism with regard to how bridges and overpasses are being built? Remember that one in New York? Yeah, we got these bridges in New York that were built for racist purposes. Racist bridges, he said. Everything's race, 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 race. Why is that? I'll tell you why. Just a hunch, just my opinion. In 2008, the United States of America elected our first black president. His name was Barack Obama. In California, that's a pretty blue Democrat state, hasn't gone for a Republican nominee for president since 1988. So, you know, Barack Obama was going to do pretty well that year, and he did. He did really well. In 2008, Barack Obama absolutely dominated in California politics. But then down ticket, that same year, there was a thing on the ballot called Proposition 8. Proposition 8 defined in the Constitution of California a definition of marriage as being between one man and one woman. And it also passed easily in the blue, left-wing, liberal state of California. The same year they elected Barack Obama, those same voters affirmed marriage should be between one man and one woman. And as you can well imagine, in California, there was a huge turnout that year for Barack Obama within the African-American community. And exit polling suggested that a huge percentage of the African-American voters in California voted for Obama and also voted for Proposition 8. Fact of the matter is, same-sex marriage and other LGBTQ plus issues are very unpopular in the black community. Pete Buttigieg wants to be president. And so anytime he has the opportunity, he has to offset the negatives he brings with him to the black voters because he's an openly gay man. He has to offset that by constantly dwelling on racial issues. Pete Buttigieg, he wants to be president of the United States, and you are watching quite possibly one of the most craven, obnoxious, shameless attempts to gain favor within the Black community and within the media. I would prefer not to talk about Mr. Buttigieg's children. They're none of my business. I want those children to have a great life. They've already got a lot of challenges ahead of them, as all children do. I would love for us to have a political conversation about Pete Buttigieg that does not revolve around his kids. I plan to do that as his career goes forward. I only wish Secretary Buttigieg planned to do the same.